This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Grant and Calvin Watkins. As we're recording this on Tuesday morning, we just got the news that Nico Harrison, the general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, the man who traded Luka Doncic to the Lakers and blew up a fan base, has been fired by the Mavericks. We don't have nothing's official yet. That's what the reports are. But if we get that official report sometime during this podcast, we'll update you with that. But
according to our Mike Curtis, citing two people, they have made the decision to end Nico's employment, and he destroyed a franchise.
Yeah, well, he certainly destroyed a fan base, and the franchise is not looking too good either right now. Calvin, besides covering the Cowboys for 100 years, at one point in his career also covered the NBA for ESPN. He covered the Houston Rockets. So he has a reservoir of knowledge about the NBA and how it works, the ins and outs. Calvin, I wanted to get your take on this. And do you feel like at this point that the Mavericks had to make the move? As they said, the rumors were been circulating now for a few days, and the one that kept coming up was because of all the negativity around the team that they had to do this, and that might be officially the case, because this is a franchise that wants to put a casino on top of their arena, or vice versa. So they have to make nice with everybody. Do you buy that, or do you feel it's a combination of everything with the Mavericks' lousy start, with Luka playing at an MVP pace for the Lakers? Is it just everything, you think, or is it one specific?
I think it's a bit of everything. I just remember the day Anthony Davis's first game with the Mavericks, right, and how he got hurt, and it just went downhill from there. I mean, they make this trade, and Anthony Davis could play. He's a Hall of Fame player. He's,
Sure.
We all could agree. And he gets hurt the first game that he plays, and it was just a disaster. And then Kyrie gets hurt later that year, which was another risky decision, but ended up working out until he got hurt. So I think it's just a combination of things. I think they didn't understand the fan base, and I think they didn't. And I understand when Nico was raised with Kobe Bryant and all that, and Kobe's is this crazy, egotistical, always in shape, always playing basketball guy, right? That's why he's among the top 10 players in the history of the game. Luka is not the most in shape guy in the world, but he plays basketball. It's like James Harden. He does what he needs to do. He's not going to look like Adonis, right? And I think Nico got caught up in all that and traded him, which was, as we now know, is short-sighted. And the fans, obviously turned on the Mavericks. The media turned on the Mavericks. And Nico didn't help himself neither, because he's not a very warm and fuzzy guy. He had no allies in the media. He was very aloof, and that doesn't help matters. I would think, in all of us have covered teams, I would say, regardless if a decision was bad or good by a team, if the guy who made that decision in the front office was available to the media, we're not as harsh with that guy because we have a little bit of a relationship with him. And so I think a lot of those factors played into Nico's dismissal today.
Forget harsh and forget the idea of the media for just a second. I mean, what you're talking about is accountability. It's accountability to the fans. It's accountability to the fan base. And yeah, the media is often the ones that ask the questions, but he wasn't accountable. And I differ a little bit. I mean, I think this was warranted because of basketball decisions, but I think ultimately The tipping point is that this Mavs ownership group knew that the arena situation was starting to get away from them. Given the events of the suit against the Stars and how that has played out in public, I don't think the fact that what are the Mavs 3-8 to start the season? I think after that loss last night, the fact that they've started out poorly doesn't really surprise me. They've got a rookie 18-year-old playing in their starting lineup, and they're without Kyrie Irving. I thought this team was going to get off to a really rough start, and that's why I thought the playoffs were kind of a stretch. I'm just surprised that the Mavericks decided to make this kind of move 11 games into this season. It's almost like, why didn't they do this after the 2024-2025 season and move on at that point? That's why it makes it feel like it's a pandering to the public a little bit.
Well, yeah. Well, look, let's look at it this way. Every firing is pandering to the public, at some point. When the drum beat gets so loud that there's nothing else you can do, that's what ownership or in college sports, when the boosters and alumni say, hey, that's it, I'm not supporting this anymore, then they make a move. So I don't think that I'm surprised by that part of it. I guess the first question we need to ask is, I want to put this in some kind of perspective. In my time here in Dallas, in my 40 years in Dallas, other than Jerry Jones' long-term effects as the general manager, I can't think of another general manager who came in and did more to antagonize a fan base. I mean, really, if we just really look at it, there was no, other than Jerry firing Jimmy, and Jimmy was wanting to go, and Jimmy orchestrated the whole thing. I don't know that anybody ever did anything in this market to make a fan base more angry. And
John Hart made a fan base apathetic, but no, I don't think since I've been here for 30 years, there's been nothing that's made a fan base this angry.
No,
and Calvin was talking before we got on the air, Kevin, just about how this Mavericks fan base has been consistent in its hatred. It has not let up one bit, not even after they won the lottery pick of Cooper Flagg. And so sometimes fan base voice does matter, and that is good to see.
Yeah, it is. This is the little bit of a parallel to me is the Nolan Ryan exit from the Rangers, and not even nearly the same kind of impact anymore. But the fan base was so attached to Nolan. The fact that, look, this legend is one of us, and they just couldn't get past that. No matter what Nolan was actually doing for the franchise, they couldn't get past the fact that Nolan Ryan is one of us. And I think that there was a feeling of that with Mavericks fans with Luka. This kid was 25 years old. He was an MVP candidate every year. He's frankly, a once in a lifetime player. As great as Dirk Nowitzki was and remains in the hearts of Mavericks fans, as I had the conversation with Jerry West, he said Luka's a better player. When Jerry West says that means something. So I think that that to me was the thing that they misjudged, and that's what Rick Welts, the CEO of the Mavericks, president CEO, he said later, we just didn't see this kind of reaction to it, and they didn't get it. They didn't get the local fan base, and I think in a lot of places they wouldn't have understood. But when you're in a market like this one, where the NBA team, to me, is still relatively new, since 1980, that's not like you're the Boston Celtics or the New York Knicks, and some franchise has been around, for 100 years. This is a place that attached itself to Luka and looked at him as, even if the team's not any good, we still got Luka.
This is a fan base that attached itself to this team partly because of the previous owner and his passion and how much he involved the fan base and how much he made the fan base central to what he was trying to do. And Mark Cuban was exceptionally successful in building a very fervent fan base. And so then when you get the opposite of that, you get out-of-town ownership, an out-of-town now president a completely disassociated ownership group that makes it clear that their emphasis is business. It's just a tectonic plate rubbing up against one another, and I think that's why this went so sideways on Nico and this ownership group. The ownership group, the administration, they just didn't grasp exactly what the Mavericks had built over the last 25 years.
I think they also alienated Dirk. Like,
Oh, for sure.
Like Luka has his first game with the Lakers last year. Dirk is there.
That was a horrible look for the Mavericks. Yeah,
that was a bad look, a terrible look. And then I think Dirk was at the Laker home opener, I think, this year. That's a terrible look. I mean, we got a statue of you outside of our building, and you're with Luka. Now, Dirk. I think whoever they hire to be the GM or whatever the basketball operations, they need to call Dirk. That's like the first call you make is that you need to come home. We need you here. I'm not saying make Dirk the GM. I'm just saying you need to bring Dirk home. Like, they're going to retire, I think, Mark Aguirre's jersey, right? And that's cute and all, but you need to get Dirk home. That, to me, is like number one on the list. Get Dirk back in the building.
That's a great Dirk dealt the death knell to Nico Harrison, in my mind, just the other day when on a national broadcast. He said they can't shoot, they can't make plays. He said this is hard to watch. So you got Jason Kidd, paddling over here trying to tell us all that this is things are going to work out. This is all good for Cooper Flagg. It's like, no, this is not good for Cooper Flagg. If you wanted it to be a situation where he's learning on the fly here, and if you're going to put this much in his lap, what you were saying then is that this team is no good, and we're just going to take our lumps here and we're going to let our young superstar learn because of it. Well, if that was the plan, that's fine, but that was not the plan. The plan was to win right now, right? Nico Harrison said so. We got a 3 to 4 year window here, and that's it. Well, now the window is broken, right? So now that's all out the window at this point. And so now I think they have to consider, if that was the plan, then you need to consider, what are you going to do going forward now? Can you keep Anthony Davis on this team? Because at some point, the way his contract is structured, they're going to have to make a decision about him. They can't give him an extension. Anthony Davis is done. If he can play right now for somebody, but that's been part of the problem, right? To start the season, he hasn't been very good. His numbers have been below his career averages and certainly below what he even put up in a limited time last year. So
he's brittle. End of story on that. He's brittle. He was brittle when he was traded for. You made that point, and he's been brittle since he's been part of the Mavs.
Yeah. Well, there's no question about it. So this is another big moment. It's kind of hard to believe that the Mavericks can keep stacking them up, but they have done that again, because now that's what everybody told me when I was writing about and readers, some pushback about complaining about the whole Nico thing. I had people ask me, don't you think the team is better now with Kyrie Irving and with Anthony Davis and with Cooper Flagg than it was with Nico? So this is going to be very important at this point to determine, what are they going to do going forward? Are they going to rebuild the team at this point? Are they going to trade Anthony? Are they going to try to just stick with what they have here at this point? Because the Nico Harrison experiment has failed miserably. I mean, we've said all along that there were reasons that the Mavericks would make this move, right? But one of them is that clearly it has failed. He is, besides the Luka trade, let's not forget the Quentin Grimes trade. They traded him to the 76ers with a second-round draft choice for Caleb Martin. Quentin Grimes is averaging 17 points for the 76ers and shooting 39% from three-point line. Caleb Martin is averaging 1.5 points for the Mavericks. So that was a bust. There have been a couple of bad moves here, and then the whole idea, the way he structured the roster, it just hasn't worked. Their defense has been okay, not great. It's been okay. And the offense is the worst in the NBA. So, and And that makes it look even worse, right? You traded the guy who's the biggest offensive force in the league, and now your offense is awful. And everybody, all the critics, and I would hear from them all the time, all of the Luka critics would say, it's no good because he just dominates the offense and he doesn't get the other guys involved enough. And look what and they won't play a good enough defense if that's the case. Well, I don't know, but that formula got you to the NBA Finals, and you lost there because you didn't have enough offense, not because you didn't have enough defense. I think that this has been an abject lesson for everybody in just how good Luka really was, and how we probably all should have appreciated him a little bit more.
So, yeah, I mean, I think right now it's easy to say that, look, this season is going to be a disaster. And if you can trade AD, you trade him when you can. And if there are other pieces that you can move, then you move them. But I think in the short term, I think Calvin brings up a great point. The first thing you can do right now is try and win back your fans. And you took a huge step by getting rid of the most unpopular player or the most unpopular person in the building. I think the second step to build on a comp that you made, Kevin, would be bring Dirk back in some kind of front-facing role. I don't expect him to be the GM, but I do think the Mavericks need to figure out a way, much like the Rangers did when they were at the height of disenfranchising their fans. They brought Nolan Ryan back into the building, and Nolan sat his ass down in the front row every game, and people came back to this club. I think the Mavericks need to try and figure something out with Dirk. I don't know what the TV arrangement for Dirk this year is like with Amazon, but the Mavericks need to bring him back into the building in some kind of front-facing role. I think also, look, we all are big fans of the move the Mavericks made in the front office on the communications front, and messaging is going to be really important. And they brought back a Dallas-raised Mavericks fan in Gina Miller, who gets this market, who's really well positioned to get their messaging forward. Now they've got to make sure they have the right messaging.
Yeah, I think that's all true, and I agree with all of that, except that, look, Dirk's motives are the purest of anybody you can possibly imagine. And the deal is that it wasn't so much, I don't think, that he was upset with how he was treated by the Mavericks. It was the fact that they traded somebody he loved and a great player.
100%.
And so I don't know that this is going to be the easiest makeup, right? And it's not that Dirk's going to be obstinate about it or anything. He's not being a jerk. It's just that this was my guy, and y'all traded him, and he's not coming back. So I think that this is going to be really difficult for the Mavs. It's going to be interesting to see who takes the job. There's some names out there, and certainly, former great GM of the Warriors be available. So I think that there's possibilities there, and this is frankly all a good sign, right? One of the things y'all alluded to earlier was the unaccountability of the general manager, Nico Harrison.
You make a move like that, you've got to answer for it. And
he was never available. I mean, he was never around. I mean, you just, we went out there for the first practice, and of course he'd been there for the opening day, but he's not available for that. It's like, how can this be? How can this guy not be standing out here to stand up for what he's done? And he didn't do that. So, and I'm guessing that we won't get him now either. So he'll go out the door pretty much the way he's been the entire time he's been the GM. So it's a mess. And this is the first step in rectifying the mess. No question about that. But the Mavericks have gone from 2 years ago being in the NBA Finals and looking like everything is headed in the right direction to implosion. I just don't know that not in this market. We've just not seen anything like that. You can compare the Cowboys if you want to, but after Jerry fired Jimmy, the next year or 2 years later, 2 years later, they won a Super Bowl. So
okay, Kevin, as we continue to report this in real time, actually, apparently, right about now, Michael Finley and Matt Ricciardi are going to lead basketball operations in the interim over there.
Okay. Well, Michael Finley's been up for other jobs. He's interviewed for jobs as a general manager. At this point, I think that's fine. If he ends up with it, and that's the easiest thing to do in the middle of the season, right? Is to at least give him the interim role to be in charge of that. So we'll see how that works out. All right, that's going to do it for the Mavericks segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk about the Cowboys, who've certainly become second news, around here. Of course, we had a terrible tragedy in the market here last week with the death of Marshawn Kneeland. Calvin Watkins was at the forefront of the reporting on all of that. And I just want to say, first of all, we appreciate that, Calvin, for the fine job you did and all that in a very difficult situation, and the way you handle all of it and the reporting, not only of his death, but afterward. So kudos to you for that. I know that was difficult. I guess, first of all, Calvin, I'd just like to ask you, what kind of interaction did you have with Marshawn? What was your impression of him personally?
He was a good kid. He was always smiling, always pleasant to be around. I remember when he got drafted, we wrote a story about his mom passing away during the draft process. And, I talked to some high school coaches about him and that kind of thing. And he was going to wear her ashes on a necklace. As I said, always smiling, always pleasant to be around. Give you the head nod when you give a head nod back. He's a young guy. When you get a little older, all these guys look like kids, right? And so he was 24 years old, and he was in the anime, and now he's gone. So it's kind of like you're just kind of stunned by it. But you don't want to ever, it's just it's hard to find the words, to be honest with you. I listened to 2 radio interviews with Stephen Jones and Jerry Jones the last 2 days, and I think it's been hard for them to find the words, really, to describe everything.
Well, I don't know that you can ever feel confident in what to say in those kind of situations. Just a tragedy that clearly, as his girlfriend told the police, he had mental issues, and usually those kind of things manifest themselves in people in their early 20s. And so I don't know if he had struggled all of his life with this, or if it's something just recently. And we know about the death of his mother, which certainly had a great impact on him. But that's been a very just kind of a terrible reminder that that there is life outside of this sport and or any sport, and what it can. And I guess I was thinking about the story about Greg Adelson, about how he took so much, not responsibility, but he felt guilty about the fact that he couldn't reach Marshawn, that he would ask him about things, and Marshawn would just kind of button back up and say, "I'm fine, everything's good," and you just don't know what to do in those types of situations and how to handle them. And we both know that Greg Ellis is a great guy and was always a very stand-up guy. And I'm not surprised that he took that attitude about that. But I feel bad for him, that's something that kind of weighs on him after the fact.
Now, all you can really do in these situations is eulogize the person and try and remind people that there's no shame in mental health issues. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to open up. If you need help, there are resources there. And I just know it's really hard in sports for guys to feel comfortable opening up about the things that really are troubling them. We've seen it in baseball with a number of guys talk about anxiety issues that they've dealt with. Obviously, Marshawn Kneeland had gone through a huge tragedy, losing his mother in the middle of what should have been a joyous time for him. And you can't help but wonder, what kind of impact that had long term, especially after he had scored his first NFL touchdown 2 days earlier and had that the person who meant the most to him not there to be able to celebrate with him.
It is tough.
Yeah,
I
I just
think he
don't
lost his
know.
grandfather too. I'm sorry. I
No,
think
no,
he
go
lost.
ahead, Cal.
I think he lost his grandfather the year before his mom passed. So, and so you lose your grandfather, and then you lose your mom, then you get drafted, and you're in like when I've talked to some mental health people, and they've talked about when you get drafted in the second round. It's almost like being drafted in the first round because you're expected to produce immediately. So you have all those expectations on you, and it's hard for some people to handle it. The Cowboys have like this great mental health program. Two of their stars, Dak Prescott and Solomon Thomas, have foundations about mental health. They've lost siblings uh, to this issue, and yet still, you lose somebody. That's got to be. As I think Jerry said it today or Tuesday on his radio show. It's devastating. You have all these programs and it's still not enough, but you still can't give up on people. You got to keep trying to help them as much as you can. So it is very sad, really. I mean,
It is sad. Well, the thing we have to remember that there can be triggers for things, but if you
yeah.
have mental health issues, it's just going to be difficult, and it's going to require a lot of work. But the first thing people have to know that you have problems, and you have to be willing to reach out. And bless his heart, I guess he just didn't feel like he could do that, and that's the
That's the
tragedy
hardest
involved.
part, right? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
hardest part is opening up and being vulnerable and exposing the things that trouble you inside.
Yeah, that is. It's terrible. So, Calvin, the Cowboys are going to have decals on their helmets. Is that correct? And then they're also going to wear T-shirts commemorating.
Yeah, they're going to have T-shirts in the pregame for the next two games against the Raiders and the Eagles. There will be a moment of silence at the next home game, and they'll have a video tribute. Marshawn's family and girlfriend are expected to be at that game. I have not gotten word on memorial services or that kind of thing, but that's what the Cowboys are planning right now. And I think in last week, players were placing flowers at his locker at the Star. So the team is taking this pretty hard, and understandably so.
Well, how could you not take it hard? This is a terrible thing. A young person dead so soon. It's one of your teammates. So locker rooms are a little different, than even environments that people work in. Sometimes you're just around these people all the time, and that just has to be really hard to take. This has been a difficult season for the Cowboys. No question about that. This. You pile tragedy on top of of what has not been a good season so far, and it starts to feel like a little too much here. It's like what does Brian Schottenheimer do at this point, right? I mean, it's his first season as a head coach. It wasn't going well, and then you put this on top of that. This will really test his ability to reach these guys. I think we've talked about that before. He's done a good job. He seems to have a good rapport with everybody. But these are the kind of things that they don't actually teach you about. This is something that has to come from him, and he has to find a way to to get these guys through this. And it's as Stephen Jones said, as hard as that sounds, everybody has to move on, right? They got to go back to work, and that's a difficult thing to say, but they will have to do that. And so
They do have to go back to work. That's true. And when people lose a loved one or a teammate in their office or in their lives, you do have to go back to work. But grieving is grieving, and I do think it's going to be. I do think it would be disingenuous to conflate how they play the rest of the way with how Brian Schottenheimer reaches his team. It may not turn into some inspirational moment. And for a lot of guys, it's just painful and you're dealing with that pain. And these are guys who were in their 20s, I mean, I had a girl when I was in high school who committed suicide in my class, and we all really struggled as teenagers with how to deal with it. I think the same thing goes for anybody, anytime, but especially young adults. You lose a friend who was there the day before. You don't understand why, and that may take a lot of time to, for lack of a better term, compartmentalize and be able to put it aside for the 3 hours or of a game, or for the work time during the week. But that's hard, because you're going to walk into that locker room and not see that face, and you're not going to see that guy, in his stance next to you. It is a difficult thing, and I don't know that what happens the rest of the way has any relevance to how well anybody potentially reach the players. I just don't know how you account for a tragedy like this in team performance.
In
I wasn't talking
2012,
about how well they would play as a team. I was just talking about that you gotta be able to reach these guys. You're the head coach. You can have all the counselors you want on the outside, but somehow you have to be able to help these guys through this.
Yep.
And like I said, this is not the kind of things they teach you in coaching 101.
in 2012, if you remember, Jerry Brown was killed. He was a Cowboys practice squad player. He was killed the day before he was supposed to leave for a game in Cincinnati. And the team was informed of his death on the plane before they took off. They played that day. They won. They won the following week. And then I think, closed the year with a 2-game losing streak. And I talked to DeMarcus Ware about just going through that. And he said we were in a fog. Like, you just never recovered. You're just living, They had a memorial service during the season. And unfortunately, this has happened to the last 3 Cowboys coaches. So Jason Garrett was the coach then. In 2020, when Mike McCarthy was the coach, the strength and conditioning coach collapsed and died in the weight room, Marcus Paul. And that was during the middle of the season, and that was during the pandemic. So they had a game that week. I think they won. And I remember asking Zeke Elliott, the show must go on, right? How do you move on? He was like, it was hard, but we had to do it because they're not canceling the games. You got a game. The only time I could ever remember them canceling games is when Kobe Bryant died and the whole NBA shut down. And then they got back a couple of days later. But unfortunately, this has happened before, but you never recover, right? During the year, you just got to play, unfortunately.
You're just going to play. Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's going to do the Cowboys segment of our podcast, too. We'll be back next week, hopefully, to be able to talk about something that is not such a terrible, terrible tragedy. They'll be playing on Monday night, obviously, so that'll be all fresh and new. All right, Calvin, thanks for coming out with us and talking about these 2 subjects with us. Pretty divergent stuff. Not even stuff about that's happening on the floor or on a court. Or on a football field, but these are the things that happen. So Evan is in Las Vegas for the GM meetings. We will determine, and maybe we'll have a better idea when you come out of there exactly what the Rangers want to do. Because I'm not clear what they want to do because I don't know how much money they're going to spend. Do you have any clue as to whether Chris Young knows how much money he can spend?
No. And, I've asked to talk to ownership to get a better idea, and ownership declined to discuss the matter. So I don't know where the Rangers stand in terms of how much they've got to cut. But if it's any more than, 10 million, than the expiring contracts, if they've got to cut more than the expiring contracts off of their payroll, they're going to have to trade somebody before they can consider adding anybody. And that's where it gets dicey. The column I wrote for Tuesday talked about 4 years ago, the GM meetings were in Vegas. Chris Young came here, and that started the winter when he started adding pitchers left and right. Before he got out of here, he got Jake Odorizzi. Wasn't exactly a real needle mover, but they added 5 free agent pitchers that winter and went on to win the World Series. And the nucleus of that group led them to the best rotation in the ERA, or the best rotation ERA in the majors this year. And now I wonder if the Rangers' first move has to be to start dismantling that.
Yeah, I speaking of accountability, this has kind of been the case, and maybe we're just a little too used to having access to Jerry Jones. But you're the one that has any access to Ray Davis. He's not talking to anybody else, and obviously doesn't always even talk to you. And I guess we should appreciate that. I don't know, but there's also a sense of it feels like he's holding the market hostage. At this point, when you're not having uh, a really good idea of what the long-term plan is. I think back to when he made the moves that he did that allowed them to bring in Corey Seager and Marcus Semien on those huge contracts. That was just a shock. It was a shock when he fired John Daniels. It's like he makes these decisions, out of nowhere, because we'd gone all those years when he wasn't really spending a ton of money. He was spending, but not he wasn't doing those big deals like he did with Seager and Semien. And so that was just a shock. And then, as I said, John Daniels was shocked when he got fired. He just had no idea that was coming. And so it just makes it, I feel like makes it kind of a difficult business relationship when you're not sure exactly what it is your boss is going to do.
Listen, Kevin, I think Chris Young has a pretty direct line to Ray, and I think he's got a decent idea. I don't think it's in the Rangers' best interest to make it public just how much they're going to cut, but it's odd not to know if it's a significant cut or if it's simply like not adding back the salaries that they lose off of these expiring deals. And so it makes it difficult. Now, I also think that Ray operates the club in more of a, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, but he operates it more like a mom and pop type business in some fronts. And that is, he keeps a pretty firm grasp on what he's got coming in versus what he's got going out. I think the uncertainty over how the TV situation did in its first year with some significant startup costs versus the revenues, and not knowing what's going to be coming in going forward, I think makes him more strict with allowing money. What we've seen Ray do in the last couple of years is he gives them kind of a, I don't want to say an austere budget, but he gives Chris Young an idea, and he says, this is where I want you to be. But then come spring training, he loosens it up a little bit and allows for some bargain hunting. I just don't know if this is going to be a different scenario this year. And where Ray Davis is concerned, in a lot of ways, this is, you like an owner who has a club, gives a budget, and moves out of the way, and doesn't take headlines, and doesn't say things that cause issues, and God knows doesn't try to make personnel moves. But on the other hand, the Rangers also don't have a front-facing president to answer the questions for ownership on these occasions when you need to get some kind of clarity about what their strategy is going forward. You need something.
Yeah. Well, Chris is the president, but I your point is,
he's president of baseball operations. He is not president of the club. Yeah.
Okay. Good point. All right. We're going to move on because we're running out of time here. We need to get out. But before we do, we want to talk about the colleges because it's big. It's a big time. I'm leaving to go to your home state on Friday, flying into Atlanta and covering Texas game against Georgia. A couple of weeks ago, I wouldn't have given Texas any chance at all in that game. I'm still not sure that they have raised their level of play up enough on the road to think that they can win there. I think that Georgia's just a better team, and Texas is still having problems. But Georgia is it's not it's not last year's Georgia. I'll say that. And last year the Bulldogs beat Texas twice. I don't know that.
Not sure how they won the second time, but yeah.
Yeah. So, what's your prediction on that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Athens, and I think, Georgia fans see Texas as a marquee game, and look, that atmosphere is really good, and I do think that the Georgia team I saw on the road against Mississippi State, I don't want Mississippi State to be the bellwether for what anybody's capable of, but that was their most complete game of the year. Their offense moved much better. They really ran the ball well, and I thought that their defense played significantly better. It was a 38-7 game before the Bulldogs allowed 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They got much more pressure on Chapin than they've been getting on quarterbacks. So I'll be interested to see. I thought Raylan Wilson, the linebacker, really got a lot of pressure. I'll be interested to see if they do some things to get him free the way they did last week. And if that happens, that's going to cause some issues for Arch, especially if he's still holding on to the ball long. But I think this will be, again, a close game because I don't think either of these teams is by any stretch of the imagination perfect. I also don't think they're as poor as they've played on some occasions this year. So I expect this to be a really close game. And it's an opportunity for Texas to really make a statement. It's an opportunity for Georgia to say, okay, this is Georgia's last SEC game of the season. It would be a nice coda for them on that part of the schedule to make their case for the SEC championship game. They're still behind, obviously, A&M, which is in the driver's seat, and Alabama, who they lost to for their one loss by a field goal.
Yeah, I'm not so sure it's going to be close. I could see Texas losing by 10, 14. I just don't. I think that Texas has too many flaws on offense. They can't protect Arch very well. They don't run the ball well. I know that they made some moves in the offensive line, and that really seemed to work well against Vanderbilt. But I just don't see it. They don't have the kind of standout players that they've had before. We've talked about this before. If you talk about Texas A&M, Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver, those are explosive players. They're terrific. Texas doesn't have that, and they don't have a running game. It's just how what are they going to base everything on here? I thought the first of the year, especially against Ohio State and through their first 3 or 4 games, well, at least this defense is really good, and that'll keep them in every game. Well, the defense is kind of starting to fall apart on them a little bit here. So we'll see. If Texas wins this game, well, then all bets are off. I mean, if they can beat Georgia in Athens, then they got every claim to winning a national championship anybody else would have. I think that's just it's probably the worst place you could go to play a game right now. I don't know that any place would be harder at this point.
Yeah, and you make a great point. Look, if Texas is one-dimensional, Kirby and his staff, his defensive staff led by Glenn Schumann, they're so good on defensive adjustments. And if they've had 2 weeks now to prepare for a one-dimensional Texas team,
that's going to be hard. That's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Aggies a little bit. They are in the driver's seat in the SEC. They've played well. They played well against Missouri. Now, Missouri did not have its starting quarterback, and that was certainly an issue. But that game wasn't even close. The Aggies keep doing everything they need to do. They don't have a really difficult schedule. But so what? They're winning all their games, and they got on the road and won games. They went on the road to win at LSU, went on the road to win at Notre Dame. Those are good wins, and so we'll see what they do now because their last big game is against Texas, of course, the day after Thanksgiving, and that'll be really fun to see that. I'll be down there for that too, and we'll.
That's a good Friday of football, Kevin. You got Georgia and Georgia Tech. That's a good Friday of football, boy. I mean, you got Georgia Tech in the afternoon and Texas and A&M at night. That's going to be a great Friday of football for people.
You got to have your turkey sandwich while you're watching that.
Maybe.
Also, SMU is right back in it with Virginia's loss. So there's like a 9-team tie at the top of the ACC standings. It's like
five teams, right?
Yeah, it's 5. I'm trying to figure it out on Sunday morning as I'm writing my best in Texas. I thought this is way too much math for me to figure all of this out about who can do what. But
well, the big thing
right
is
in the middle.
the big thing is SMU can kick out another one of that group from the tie if they beat Louisville next week, right? That's not this week. That's the 22nd.
Well, it was next week. I will be at that game. So that'll be a big game for SMU. Mustangs are their defense has really come a long way in this season. When they played TCU, I thought, they're not going anywhere. This defense is terrible, and they've gotten a lot better defensively. We talk about that all the time about over the course of the season. Especially in college football, because there's everything is about head-to-head competition, and so when you lose somebody, then you should be out. Well, maybe not. Some teams get better. TCU's gotten worse since beating SMU. So yes. I think the SMU's gotten a lot better defensively, and so that'll make a difference. And Kevin Jennings is a real wild card. He's terrific. Got a lot of he might be. We've gone around and around about this, or at least I have in my own mind about whether Sawyer Robertson or is the best quarterback in the state. I think right now I'd say Kevin Jennings was. He just gives you so much as a dual threat quarterback, and so that'll be fun to watch that to see how they turn up. But it is a remarkable time in the state in that you've got 3 schools, and we hadn't even mentioned Texas Tech, which is playing great. They had that one slip up against Arizona State, and they've just pretty much plowed everybody else. That was a big time win over BYU. Who was ranked ahead of them. They're undefeated. They really put the lights out. So I think that what's that?
The game day scene was great. Joey McGuire apparently was outstanding both on the McAfee show on Friday and on game day on Saturday. And look, Joey can sell that program, and he's doing a great job. And this year, he's their time in the spotlight. He's soaking it up, and Texas Tech is positioned to do some pretty special things both this year and going forward.
Well, no question about that. We hadn't really given Joey enough credit, I don't think. The whole attention on Texas Tech is buying players, right? And so Cody Campbell's money, and you still got to coach them up, and he's doing that. They're doing a great job. They're doing all this too with a quarterback who's missed about, it seems like, half the time. Baron Morton, who's been hurt a lot, and they keep winning. So this has been a very impressive performance. So you've got A&M, Texas Tech, SMU, all still in running. We hadn't mentioned UNT is in the running for the Group of 5 representative at 8-1. They've played great. We got a big time quarterback in Drew Mestemaker. So, well, it looks like Evan's internet was not really good in his hotel room. That's what he gets for staying in a Motel 6. But at any rate, that was quite a field of things that we talked about. And we'll be back next week to talk more. Is Evan back? Is that you, Evan?
Hi, I'm back from my parallel universe.
Evan, we're wrapping it up. We're out of here.
Just a word of advice to all the tourists out there. The Wi-Fi at MGM's complex of hotels here is slow, apparently.
Slow. They're fast to take your money, though, aren't they?
I won $27 last night, Kevin.
$27. Okay. All right, that's going to do it for us. We thank you for coming out. We'll be back next week and talk some more. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.